The Middle East has a new story to tell, and this is From MENA to the World. And I'm your host, Amir Farha. I've been investing in startups since 2005. More recently, I co-founded Beko Capital, and now Co2 Ventures, a seed-stage VC focused on investing in incredible founders in the Middle East at the earliest stages of their journeys. I've been involved in backing extraordinary companies founded by amazing people. And over the years of investing, I've found that I love understanding the human side to entrepreneurship. I love hearing the stories from people that faced and surmounted huge challenges. And I love championing underdogs who are against the odds of success. For the longest time, the MENA region has been misunderstood. Today, we are creating a new narrative, a new voice that harnesses our strengths and is a driver of our future. The Middle East has a new story to tell, and this is From MENA to the World.
In this episode, we're talking to Talal Bayaa, founder and CEO of Bayzat, a health insurance and HR platform for SMEs in the UAE. Talal is someone I've known for over 10 years now, having backed Bayzat in my previous firm. Here he shares an honest account of his life and the struggles he's had to overcome and the opportunities ahead. We hope you enjoy tuning in.
Talal, good to have you on the show. I really appreciate you making time today, man. You and I go way back, as you know, and this show is the first of many episodes that hopefully will showcase role models, stories of entrepreneurs like yourself. Anyway, cut the long story short, I'm going to go straight to it, and I want you to just introduce yourself and like your story, just your personal story that got you to Dubai to build Bayzat, but really as early as you can.
As early as I can. So I'm Talal. I'm the co-founder at Bayzat. My dad's Palestinian. My mom is Syrian, born in Southern California in 1986. When I was 6 years old, we moved out to the Middle East. So come from a traditionally Arab family, but born and raised in the UAE. So I'm a product of, Dubai.
Awesome. And you have two brothers and a sister, right?
2 brothers and 1 younger sister. I'm a middle child.
Yeah, like me.
So that explains a lot of things, I guess.
Me too. No sister though for me. But yeah, dude, take me through. What was it like growing up in Dubai, man?
So I actually grew up in Abu Dhabi, first 6th grade. I remember floppy disks. I remember the first mobile phone, the Nokia. I remember dial-up internet. When you think about it that way, it makes you feel kind of old. Growing up in the UAE was pretty exciting, to be honest. I mean, we were here when it was more of a sort of village, small city vibe. I remember the first movie theater that opened up in the UAE. I remember the first Burger King, the first McDonald's, driving hour and a half just to get there from Abu Dhabi to Dubai to eat there. So it's been pretty awesome seeing the transformation of this country.
When you look at like your childhood and you think about like you choosing to be a founder, most Arab families, there's also social stigma around, entrepreneurship, at least for our generation. Today, it's becoming much more mainstream. When did you think you were first like realizing that, I want to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I guess going back to childhood, looking back, I was pretty stubborn as a kid. I always wanted to do things my way, pretty impatient as well. So, one of the early childhood memories for me was, I was like 4.5, 5 years old, getting the bike for the first time with the training wheels. And our house in California was on like this really high mountain. So it was a pretty mountainous area. So it was like a steep sort of decline down the road. Rode it for like 2 hours with the training wheels. Then I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm ready. And, people were like, no, that's not a good idea. But that's sort of me. I was impatient. I just wanted to do it my way. Took off the training wheels, went down the hill and ended it in a pretty big disaster. I've always had the itch to be an entrepreneur just because I like doing things my way. As a kid, I didn't necessarily want to be told what to do. So I think that was a big part of it. And then obviously my dad was an entrepreneur. My mom had a business when I was younger. So it kind of runs in the family.
Yeah, you don't think that maybe being middle child also had an impact there? Because I think as I look at myself and I have that same issue when it comes to authority. I struggle with that sometimes. And the whole my way thing I can resonate with. It has an impact to you ending up.
Yeah, I mean, if you read about what typically a middle child has as a personality, older, younger, it's like an accurate horoscope. Like it's real, right? It actually ends up being a main driver in how you are shaped as a person, how your personality ends up. I don't think it's a coincidence. So I think being a middle child, you have a chip on your shoulder, you're more independent, and you just want to prove people wrong.
Also, our brothers. I mean, my brother's a year older, your brother's a year older, right?
Yeah. So my older brother is a year older, year and a half older. My younger brother is like a year and a half, 2 years younger.
It's crazy, man. I'm telling you how that childhood shapes you. We met 10 years ago when I had bought the domain name Bayzat with double A.
Yeah.
Thinking of doing this, doing the similar thing, and then got connected through Bahir, if you remember, Bahir Hakim, I think. But the time you started, you had thought of Bayzat as a financial products kind of comparison site. You weren't full time. I asked to invest. You said no to me, and then walk us through that journey, dude. First, how you came up with the idea, and then we obviously came back together in 2015, and I'll talk about that later.
The full story there was obviously the valuation you offered us. That's why we said no. It wasn't you.
That was okay. Fine, I'll take that.
So I graduated from university in 2008 in the middle of the financial crisis. Wasn't really a lot going on in the job market. So I came back to Dubai, did investment banking for 2 years, private equity for 2 years, pretty small boutique firms. During that time, I was kind of thinking about, okay, what can I do myself? More from a problem-solving perspective. I like identifying problems, coming up with ideas. And then finally, one of those days, I was telling one of my many ideas to Brian, who's now my co-founder, and he's the one who pushed and said, okay, let's do it. There wasn't really a VC ecosystem back then. I mean, you know that Beko wasn't even formed at the time. We didn't even know anything about VCs, really. We said, look, we'll hire some people, we'll continue with our jobs, we'll work in the evenings, on the weekends, make our first hires, pay them from our own salaries, so that once I move and jump ship to join Bayzat full-time, the ball's already rolling. We can't afford for me to go there and kind of kick things off. There wasn't that type of money. So we put in most of our savings. Obviously, we thought building technology platform website was going to be cheap. Turned out to be wrong.
I mean, a lot of learnings there. I think it's important to share. Like you ended up, let's go take a step back first on the idea first. So you and Brian got together. What made you say, okay, I want to solve this problem. It's compelling enough for me to put money in and try.
So actually, I think, one company that doesn't really get credit for being, in my opinion, the first sort of major fintech is Mint.com in the US, part of Intuit. So I think they were pioneers in the fintech space, right? People kind of forget about them because they started pretty early on. So that was a pretty interesting concept for us because having worked in financial services, I understood that the UAE was a hyper-competitive market. Population of 8 million, you have 40 banks, 60 insurance companies. I remember reading a statistic at the time that Japan had like 10 or less insurance companies with a population that's, over 10x what the UAE is. So we had these dreams of building a Mint.com for, Middle East Africa. Having been in the region for so long, we also understood the limitations there in terms of how can you partner with banks, get better data about consumers, integrate with them. So we said we'll launch a price comparison website. And the thinking at the time was we launch this website, it meets an immediate market need, it's exciting. From there, we get some critical mass, and then we're able to bully, banks, insurance companies to say, okay, now you have to integrate with us if you want to keep working with us.
Yeah, okay, hold that, because I guess there's a lot of learnings there too. But you went and you got a sort of a web agency or development company to come and help you with the initial build out, and a lot of learnings there, I think, which I would love for you to share. And then you ended up pivoting from this business model. So I'd love to understand that too.
So one thing we did is we spoke to a lot of people before we started, and they said, you obviously have to build this in-house. We took the advice pretty seriously, but at the same time, we're like, us hiring an engineer or 3 engineers right now is going to take a lot of time. So we retained an agency that was recommended to work on the product. We scoped it out. Thankfully, I don't think we went too overboard with the requirements. Looking back, I think we did say no to a lot of things. While that was happening, we started looking to hire engineers. So actually, by the time the agency was done with their work, we had already hired our first engineer. And then they took the platform over and we moved from there.
Okay, and then you also learned I'm not going to speak on your behalf, but I mean, there's some business model constraints that existed in the initial model, right? Or at least maybe not the constraints, but the opportunity for another model that came about. Maybe walk us through that, because pivoting is a natural thing that most startups go through. You did it super early, before we even came in, right? When you had kind of self-funded it or bootstrapped it to them. So what was the reason for the pivot? And what was the insight that you got that you're like, you know what, I need to go down this path?
Yeah, I think we had the right mindset, which hopefully we continue to have in the future, which is not being wishful, right? Not hoping things will just get better. If something's not going well, we're not happy with something, then we need to change. Otherwise, we're going to get the same results. So on that specific business model, we always understood that the name of the game was to arbitrage traffic, right? Which was, we can drive people to our price comparison website and then sell on those banking leads and make insurance revenue at a rate that's higher, i.e. like positive unit economics. And what kind of scared us was we started spending on marketing. It was okay. It wasn't super expensive, but we always knew that, compared to developed markets, financial services always among the most expensive keywords, right? So that was a very transient opportunity. But the thing that really scared us was when we'd go sit down with banks in those days. I'm not sure if this is still the case. We'd sit down in the marketing department and they had no idea what their cost of acquisition was, because that was the responsibility of the credit cards department, the accounts department, whatever other business unit
when was
there
this?
was.
Give a context in terms of year, 2000?
2013 and first half of 2014. So they're just like, this is the CPL I expect. And obviously they'd benchmark it off what they spend on Google AdWords or Facebook, which is what we kind of have to spend on as well in those early days.
CPL meaning cost per lead, yeah.
Cost per lead, yeah. So that was actually the thing that was like, okay, these guys don't even know how much it costs them to acquire a customer. How can they ever accurately value our service?
What was exciting is the learnings that you had so early in the game, and then you wanted to pivot into this model in part because of the timely nature of insurance being mandatory across the UAE, and then the annuity model of being an insurance revenue stream versus the transactional comparison business model that was somewhat flawed in terms of its sustainability. How did it come about?
It was a lot of luck. We had the website. I remember we had some banking products, and we decided to launch individual health insurance as our first insurance offering on the website. It was a decision between that and motor insurance, but for us, we said individual health seems more complicated. Let's try that first. And then a couple months later, Dubai announced a law saying it's going to become mandatory to provide health insurance for your employees. And they gave like a 1.5 to 2 year window when it would become effective. But almost immediately, we started getting people coming to our contact form saying, can you please help us get health insurance for our employees? We were only B2C at the time, so it was kind of surprising to see this happening. But what it meant was just the mere fact we were the only decent looking website, decent online presence for health insurance was enough to drive traffic at the time. We said, let's investigate this opportunity, try to work with these customers. And we hit an immediate roadblock, which was that they couldn't really give us data about their employees. Again, we were only 3 or 4 people at the time. So it was like really strange to us that how can you not know who works in your company right now, what people's date of birth is, how can you make mistakes on these things? Regardless, we said, let's investigate the root cause here. And it was really down to the fact that they had pretty basic HR processes, right? And they didn't really spend any of their technology budget on HR people, right? They tended to spend first on sales, so like a CRM, marketing, finance, operations, things like that. And that was sort of the eureka moment for us. It started very simple, which is let's build an employee records management platform for these customers to add value to them.
And the insurance being the business model because of the mandatory nature of
Exactly. We needed information about their employees, which was a problem for them to procure. So we said, let's give them a tool to make it easy to manage.
There's so many learnings because obviously this has been a long journey for you, dude. Like you're talking 7 years, coming on to 8 now. I've been with you, luckily for me, for majority of that time. So I've seen you grow as a founder. And you said you were full-time when you were 3 or 4 employees. Now, how big is the company?
We're now 150 team members across 3 offices, Dubai, India, and Turkey.
Walk us through some of the most significant learnings or insights that you've gotten from going from 3 to 4 people to 150, you said?
There's the obvious ones in terms of the team you start with shouldn't be the team you end with or even, progress with 3-4 years down the line. From a very simple perspective, what did I know about hiring people back then? It's a whole competency, it's a whole industry. I hired people who were really good, don't get me wrong, but the reality is what's the probability that I selected 100% the right people? That's just something you have to be aware of. At the end of the day, you have to put the right people in the right positions and give them the right support to succeed. And your company is going to evolve drastically over time, your team. Other important learning is I never imagined that the biggest challenge as we scale is getting people aligned around the vision, the strategy, making sure people are focusing on the right things.
So communication for alignment's sake.
Yeah, there's a study that leaders under-communicate transformation, change, strategy by a factor of 10. And they did it mathematically, right? They said this is how many words either your employees hear or see via email in a given month. And this is on average, looking at whatever the memos, the presentations that leaders do, how many words about these changes or strategy they see. And the share is 0.2% or something. So from a share perspective, there's no way this will be the top of mind for your team. So I think that's been probably one of the biggest learnings for me is around how do you communicate strategy, how do you make it clear to people, and how do you make sure that they all understand what their role in the company is.
And how do you do that?
A lot of repetition, emails, all hands, one-on-ones, because again, it's about share of voice. Of all the things they hear or see, what's your share? So we're picking, okay, which of these problems do we want to tackle next? You have to remind people, okay, this is around strategy. How are we going to think about it in the context of our strategy? Where should it be prioritized? It has to become part of your basic lingo. Another really important thing is strategy doesn't actually mean the same thing to everyone. For a period of 2 years, I talk to my co-founders and execs and be like, we're not aligned on strategy. Everyone's doing their own thing. What we realized is it's not about the strategy wasn't aligned. Strategy is a multi-levels, and they were talking about a specific level, and I was talking about a higher level, and someone was talking about a basic level. Finding the right framework to define your strategy is super important. And it became much clearer. We did this whole exercise. It's a book called Playing to Win, and that made it very simple, right? So now when we say strategy, we mean these 5 different choices that we've made. Part of it was just educating ourselves more and making sure we're aligned on the actual word itself. One thing I didn't appreciate till later on was the importance of building trust with people. For me, by definition, I hired you, so I trust you, and it's a trusting relationship. But that's not how it works for most people, right? You have to spend the time building trust with them. Once you do that, then you just have to be okay giving people feedback and just having honest conversations and making it a lot more about the work versus personal. That's something where people end up appreciating the relationship more. It's more trusting. They appreciate the work more. And the reality is, look, the awkwardness of telling someone to go doesn't really happen that often in this context because they always know where they stand and they know what's coming. And a lot of them, if you make it clear that it's just not the fit and that's not happening, in a surprising manner, it's been an ongoing conversation. Most people they're equally unhappy not performing, right? Not being the best version of themselves, and they're equally unhappy if it's not the right fit for them. Everyone who's left our company has ended up in an even better place or position. So it's not the end of the world, right? Everything works out for us and in life and happens for a reason. So I think you take comfort in that and just focus on the work, focus on helping them get better and supporting them and, being ready to make adjustments from your side if they're willing to give the feedback.
Apart from feedback, even though it's important, imagine you mean just open channel of feedback, right? You don't mean you do 360 reviews every year, once time. It's just constant flow of feedback. right, as a tool.
Yeah.
And then when you think about building trust, what other things have you learned allow you to continue to foster that? Because I know you've had really cool C-level retreats where you go deep on certain subjects, and you're one of the few companies that do this. People do it, but I don't think as often as they should. And I think that deep connection and communication and exercise allows you to foster trust, at least amongst leadership, let alone the wider employee base.
It hasn't been my forte historically, but I think it starts with being genuine, always being transparent about the company, what's going on. No bullshit, no politics, just no sugarcoating things, right? We even went to lengths to describe, like, this is the impact on the economy from this. Jobs are going to be harder to come by. Earnings may not recover. So if you lose your job, like, it's going to be hard to get back to your previous level of earnings. Just the realities, right? This is what could happen. Prioritizing the truth and being honest over anything else. Because it's like very easy to avoid saying the truth or avoid saying how it is.
Or sugarcoat it a little bit, maybe.
Or sugarcoat it. And it's a slippery slope. Sometimes it's easy to justify that, yeah, this is the better thing to do. But as long as you stay true to your principles, I think people start, believing in you. And then the other part is these people are your friends at the end of the day. So you have to treat them as such, right? And you have to have conversations that friends would have, right? The small talk is important, which is not something I would have said early on.
Now that you've been in this journey for so long, what do you think your strengths are as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask people, probably they'll say consistency, reliability, level-headed, good under stress, doesn't, get stressed. Probably that's the main things they would say.
Interesting. I guess then when we talk about stress, I mean, I know some of the fundraisers you've had to go through, and, most startups have to go through tough moments in their journey. And I know you've had a few on the fundraising at least, and, just COVID as well has been an interesting challenge for everyone. What would you describe as your hardest moment so far?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to like the answer. Nothing in retrospect was as good or bad as it seemed at the time. I said once, I gave an analogy to someone, so maybe this will explain why I say there's no one worst moment, is said, sometimes it feels like you're digging your own grave with a teaspoon.
Okay.
Right? So it's, small, but look, I mean, there's been hard moments. I think for me, I've always focused on action, even though I know where we want to go and we have that vision, which again has evolved over time. The execution has to happen day by day. It's way too stressful to be thinking about 10 next things on a daily basis versus, okay, I know I have to do them, but as long as I can come in today, focus my efforts on the one or two main things I have to do, I'm going to do them at a higher quality. I'm going to do them in a happier state with less stress, and then move on to the next thing, right? I have pressure, but stress comes when you don't feel like you have the time needed and enough time to allocate to do what you need to do. You can have a lot of pressure, but if you're comfortable with how much time you have, then it's manageable. You're not going to be stressed. But definitely, fundraising was challenging. But even then, the mindset was just come in every day, do what I need to do, make 20 calls.
I think one of your values is get shit done, right?
Yeah, get shit done.
I want you to walk me through your culture building process in as short but as concise space as you can. I really appreciate it. So I want the audience to learn something from it.
The culture started pretty early on. I think when we were 7 people, I remember we said, hey guys, let's build our culture code. What are the things you like about working here that really stand out to you? What are the things you hated at your other companies? We got a Google Sheet. We basically put what everyone said, then we voted on it, and then we said, here's our culture code. And it was, 5 values. Can't remember them at this point. There's accountability, communication, empowerment, a few other things. That was good. It was easy to remember. People would start repeating them. We had, 3 sort of codes: get shit done, our customers deserve to be delighted, empower your peers. The get shit done one especially picked up. People till today, it's still part of our culture. And from there, we started kind of saying, okay, we're getting bigger now. One word doesn't really mean too much or the same thing to everyone. And what's more important now is how do we have a framework to facilitate decision making, how we should be thinking about different scenarios, whether it's solving a problem, handling a customer, hiring someone, talking about strategy. And then that's how we evolved it into the principles. And we deprioritized having something super easy for people to remember. And we went a bit heavier, a lot of it taken from the framework and style of, Ray Dalio's principles.
You're one of the earlier founders in this ecosystem. You're doing B2B SaaS. One could argue, at least from my experience, you were at a time when SMEs were barely adopting technology solutions. Now the consumer wave has made it is much more widespread today, so automatically translates into SMEs being more susceptible to adopting technology. And I'm sure your business, that adoption curve is quite clear. Maybe you can describe out for those people who are trying to do software in the Middle East, like what that looks like, what ideas you have for them to think about that you may not have thought about, but you learned in your journey.
15 years ago, 25% of the workforce was millennials. It's 2005. As of 2020, both in the UAE and globally, it's at 50%. In 5 years' time, it will be 75%, right? So I think we're just sort of getting started with the wave of adoption, especially for B2B SaaS companies, right? It's still very early days. I want to give advice, but I'm also hesitant too, right? So we invested heavily in sales, more so than product engineering in the early days. And we found sort of product market fit later. In retrospect, would I have done it differently? I think I would have tried it differently. I don't know if it would have yielded better results, because going through that journey and the hardship of actually selling to people allowed us to achieve the product market fit in the first place, right? Especially here in this region where, as you said, people weren't really using a lot of technology. It makes sitting down with a customer and testing your hypothesis much harder. You're going against the strongest form of competition, which is their habit, right? Their existing habit.
Exactly. Changing behavior is one of the hardest things. It can be a challenge for founders to be focused. How did you approach that when you had, you could go into payroll, you can go into, I think at some point, lab testing was interesting. We had other ideas around, maybe that's the identity crisis you're talking about a little bit, but share what you think.
So for longest time, early on, we said, no, we're not getting into payroll, and then we're not going to do performance management. The beauty is you have customers, they love what you're doing, they give you feedback, and you start gathering data, right? So that became for us payroll, right? Okay, we said we weren't going to do this, but customers want it. Then it was attendance, right? Why do you want to do attendance? Customers kept talking about it. Now it's our highest usage feature, right? Highest engagement, because obviously people use it on a daily basis. So I think taking like the back seat and letting customers drive some of the conversation is one part of helping shape things. That doesn't work for every feature or product, right? Sometimes you have to give them things that they didn't know they wanted.
Especially, sorry to interrupt you, especially because they may be also a bit limited in their knowledge of technology, and what they ask for is perhaps not widely accepted as a need. So it's like, how do you pick and choose what's useful?
That's kind of where the strategy framework comes in, right? So our vision or our aspiration is to make a world-class employee experience accessible to every company. And where do we play? We play in the UAE through direct sales in the SME segment. How we achieve this aspiration is by automating, enhancing health insurance, payroll, and HR administration. So those are sort of the buckets there, right? If we're going to add a new bucket these days, it has to be a very good case made and it has to be tested and validated first. Now, everything we do should fall under that aspiration, right? So how do we decide what we're going to do on the health insurance side? Okay, is this actually redefining the employee experience? The challenge for me in terms of focus and learning was we operate in this industry on the insurance and even on the payroll side that's very manual and has extremely low use of any relevant technology. And you get into this mindset of I'm going to also automate the value chain in the process. You start thinking about that and then thinking about the customer value proposition. I think what kind of changed our mindset there, one is obviously just somebody once like, guys, like changing the value chain is way too expensive. It's going to take way too long. You're never going to get there. But then the second part was actually, again, just refocusing on our customer. If we automate the value chain, here's going to be the benefits to our customer. So it was like, we can give you faster turnaround times on XYZ. We had 3 other choices we could make as well. One was the status quo, so we're going to invest more heavily in HR payroll. The other one's going to invest in healthcare experience. And then the other one was, we're going to give you mental health support. 4 distinct choices. And the one about automating the value chain didn't perform well when we tested it. And that's where thinking about, are you insurance or HR software, gets you in trouble. Because if you're insurance, then you're like, okay, I need to automate the insurance industry, but your customer doesn't really give a shit about that.
This brings me to use this opportunity really to describe out what the region looks like for people who are, let's say, potentially looking to learn about the UAE and the wider region, but also being a founder in this part of the world is not easy, while I think founders here are just as capable as any other founder in any part of the world. So how do you look at that? Like, and what made you just say, you know what, I believe in the region, or I'm excited about insurtech as a category because it's fragmented market, big market? Just describe it out for people.
I don't really think there's a region. I think it's like just a set of separate countries. I mean, there's no sort of common regulations, laws. It's not like it's the EU or it's like the US with different states. Very, very separate countries, very different. From an economic standpoint, you have, UAE, Qatar sitting sort of to one level, and then you have the rest of the GCC countries, and then you have a lot of poorer countries with a lot of inequality. For us, like the lens of the region in terms of GCC or MENA wasn't a very useful framework to look at it. It was like, what are the markets where there's scalability in terms of what we do? Why do we do insurtech? At the end of the day, again, I could have been doing anything. I just like solving problems, building things, building a great place for people to work. And that could happen in any industry, any market as well, right? The UAE, I mean, honestly, it was circumstance, I have to say. Like, graduated in 2008, the US was already in a recession. UAE wasn't in a recession yet. I got a job in investment banking in the UAE, where for some reason they were still hiring literally 2 weeks before Lehman Brothers collapsed. And these guys were still on a hiring spree. So that was the opportunity. But obviously, I had grown up in the UAE. I like living here. I think it's a phenomenal market. It's like one of the most sort of international cities in the world. There's not many cities that could compete with it. I think it has some interesting dynamics, right? For us, for example, we do financial services, pretty big industry here, given the size of the population, right? Insurance industry in the UAE on health insurance and even total insurance market side is similar to Saudi Arabia. Health insurance right now it's probably getting close to $6 billion. Total insurance market is like probably 12. Saudi Arabia is similar. What I like about the UAE is very accessible markets. What I mean by that is people say like, why don't you go into India or some of these other markets, right? And I say, in the UAE, if I look around me, pretty much most of the things I operate in terms of industries, like other co-founders, is like you look around you, there's a good chance that 75% of the people are potential customers for you. They have the buying power. They're of a similar sort of status as others, similar adoption of technology. Not many markets like that where the concentration is so high. Now, obviously, then depends on your industry in terms of scalability. Are you going to go into UAE, Saudi, Egypt? If I was going to spend the rest of my life in Egypt and I was from Egypt, I'd be in the market. But for me, as an insurance, specifically as a dollar investor, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to retire somewhere where the currency is the US dollar, right? I'm raising money from dollar investors. So how can I justify going into a market that's, 15% the size of the UAE? The average revenue per customer is like 15% as well of what it is in the UAE. It's a hard sell.
So at the risk of sounding too opportunistic, right? Because it sounds like you just totally did not plan to be a founder in the UAE, but you found an idea. When I think that I agree with you. So the way you described it out makes sense. When we had these discussions in the past, you'd be like, look, I could, if I was going to do another company, it probably would be in a different market. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the most important things for any founder, any investor is total addressable market. It's like the number one indicator of how fast the company can grow. You have a lot of leeway and room for error when your TAM is massive, right? We can still be a pretty big company in the UAE, but our margin of error is, if we mess up 1 year, which we have, right?
You've raised over 20 million. I don't have to give the exact number, but you've gone through many fundraisers. What can you share about what you've learned in the fundraising process and what you look for now when you look at investors? Because I'm sure you can be as blunt and honest as you want to be.
Look, the ideal scenario for any business owner, any founder, is you build a massive business and you never raise money from anyone. You kind of have to think now, looking back, like how big are these guys actually now? They've been overtaken in fields they founded and pioneered by other companies with more money. So is it idealistic? Maybe, maybe not. But you have to start with that as, in my opinion, like sort of the baseline. When you ask me that question, what's the best scenario I can imagine is like I built a massive business and I 100% of it, I never raised money. The world's way too competitive, right? The world's way too competitive to even think about that. And it costs money to acquire customers. There's like no virgin markets and virgin sectors anymore. In terms of how do you go about raising money and what's important there, I think for me was one is just always being genuine, not too much ass kissing. You want to end up with people who like you for who you are as a person. The other part was, it's practice. Like you have to continuously refine your pitch. You have to, just like as if you're in sales, right? The quality of your pitch is correlated to how much you've practiced it and refined it, gotten feedback. You have to get good at reading the room, people's reactions, going back like, okay, this is how I should be pitching this, saying these things. And I think one thing that really helped me massively was coming from, I studied bioengineering, but I did my CFA and I worked in investment banking and private equity. I think that was an amazing experience for the fundraising side of things, right? Being able to understand and show people the main levers of the business very clearly, right? And making that transparent was extremely useful. In terms of getting investors on board, I mean, look, it's pure hustle. I guess there are probably people who are great salespeople, have great networks, but I would assume for most of us, it's just like grinding and hustling and getting it done.
I have to say though, you've been one of the you took a thoughtful approach sometimes to the whole fundraising space, where you would, for example, look at investors globally that have invested in the space, reached out to them even on cold emails, and the way you approach those cold emails was even more thoughtful, and that's resulted in like some positive outcomes for you. So it's kind of like maybe one of the messages is also that don't be afraid to go cold, and as long as you have a very succinct storyline around that, because you've built quite a diverse cap table.
Yeah, definitely. You have to have like a very sales-driven mindset, which means like all these data points, A/B testing emails, structuring them well, understanding why something is of interest to someone, pitching it that way. I guess maybe one dynamic for the region and being in a young ecosystem was, I don't think this was only, I mean, better than I do, but I don't think it was only related or specific to Bayzat, was that a lot of us companies coming out 2013 and 14, very small sort of VC network. And what was interesting was that most of us, like the first 3 rounds were led by the same VC that he started with, because there was like no one else who would...
There's no depth of capital.
There's no depth, and there's no bridge to the outside world, right? So at least to the investors we were talking to, is like relatively easy to explain, like these guys aren't coming in now because this is the ecosystem, like, just look at any other company, they've supported them throughout, and now it's like the next stage. But I assume when they hear that could be pretty problematic for companies in more developed ecosystems. So I think hopefully in the future for other startups, they're better able to sort of manage the participation of their investors across more rounds.
Yeah, I guess, you've seen the ecosystem grow, right? Like from where you said, like 2013, there was very few players. Now there's a lot more. Even sovereigns are coming in. That's quite exciting for founders today. But if you were to give them advice when they engage with investors in terms of what to look for, because I feel like there is a shift happening where it was an investor sort of dominated in terms of power dynamic to more equal, if in fact often the case now, founder-led, which is a great thing in most cases. What advice do you have when they partner with these guys? Because now you've had a journey where you've had people with you for years.
So entrepreneur-friendly is really appreciating the journey and being excited about being part of the journey, having that conviction in that person. At least, obviously, like it's not unconditional, but at least early on. When you sit in a meeting and you're doing your pitch, if the person gets excited and tells you they're excited, regardless of I'm going to invest or not. For me, those have been some of the best relationships I've built that I still have till today, that, even in tough times, those people have surprised me with how supportive they've been. That's like 4 or 5 investors. And that was the common thread between them, which is like them saying, I like this business, I like you, straight up, no games, no BS, no like playing hard to get. That's pretty much the common theme, because, again, a lot of different personalities and profiles, but that's the common theme across all these investors. And that for me is what I meant by entrepreneur friendly.
So empathy, appreciating the journey, building connection at tough times and good times. Those are types of traits that you think are useful, but it's obviously hard to read up front. You got to test that relationship once they're on board, right? And there is a risk that you bring on investors that can also make your life a bit more challenging.
Yeah, it's not foolproof, but what I said about like seeing someone's reaction and the things they say and them getting excited has, in my case, proven to equal more positive relationships.
Okay, that's the indicator. Can you name some books that you like to read and you recommend?
In terms of the last few books I've read, I think there's a lot of books. Can't really recommend one. There was The Playing to Win on strategy. There was The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger. So every 3-4 books I read like a memoir. Thinking Fast and Slow.
What did you like about The Ride of, what was it called?
The Ride of a Lifetime?
Yeah.
It was short. It wasn't like overdone with like trivial stories. It was to the fact, and there was some really good sort of quotes in there, and like the way he frames things was really good. So the one that stuck with me is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And the last one is, or the last two is Think Like a Roman Emperor. Terrible title, horrible title, but good book. It's about Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius. And then the last one is also, one of my favorite leader figures, which is John Wooden, coach at UCLA basketball, considered the most successful basketball coach or coach period in history. So he had a book called Wooden on Leadership.
Okay, maybe we'll end with a couple of more questions. One of them is like, when you look back at the journey so far, like if you were to ask yourself, what would you do differently?
I mean, it's a tough question, honestly. What I had done differently, I mean, there's a lot I should have done differently. Was it realistic to expect that I should have known better at the time? Probably not. But definitely, I think maybe spending more time with customers earlier on, having some more maturity around that mindset of understanding customers is something I would have done differently. Probably the other one is not spending time and losing sleep and patience over things I can't control.
You said exits, people can come and give us a term sheet and I'll have to get board approved. That's a very pragmatic approach, right? But in reality, Talal himself, like he looks as his driving reason for let's say Bayzat, or at this point in his life, because obviously it evolves. It's not this.
Yeah. I guess on that front, I kind of adopted some views because I wasn't sure what to say, and people ask, what's your legacy? What motivates you? Why do you try so hard? One thing that John Wooden said, so I'll quote him. So he won 7 championships in a row. In those 7 seasons, their record was 185 wins, 5 losses. And they interview people that played for him in the book. And the thing that stands out is all of them said he never mentioned or spoke about or even said the word winning at all. In a game, he never mentioned the score.
I wanted to thank you, dude. That was awesome. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you were able to take away some valuable insights on this episode. Subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast listening app, and please don't forget to leave us a review and share it with your friends. The Middle East has a new story to tell, and this is From MENA to the World.